Hi everyone. So for today's Q&A, I figured it would be best if I just did a voiceover. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it. So the most common question that I get is how did Mackenzie lose her eyes and was she born blind? So Mackenzie was actually born with beautiful blue eyes. She was not born blind or without eyes. Unfortunately, when she was 11 weeks old, she suffered from an eye disease called glaucoma, and that basically prevents the eyes from naturally flushing out the fluids, which causes a buildup of fluids on the eyes. This causes blindness, making the eyes appear cloudy, and it's also very painful due to the pressure of the fluids that's built up on the eyes. It can cause migraines and just pain in general. This disease is also quite common in huskies, especially ones with blue eyes, which Mackenzie had. And unfortunately, it happened at a really young age. Glaucoma tends to happen around 6 to 8 years old. Because there's no cure for glaucoma, Mackenzie had to just rely on eye drops until she was old enough to get her eyes surgically removed at around 6 months old. And the reason why we had to remove her eyes is because the medication was no longer working on her eyes, and if left untreated, the eyeball can continue to swell and eventually rupture, which is far worse than leaving it alone. Mackenzie started showing signs of glaucoma at 11 weeks old. Actually, the day before I went to pick her up, I was notified by the owner that she had ran into a door and hit her right eye directly on the corner of the door. So that caused secondary glaucoma. And then a couple of weeks later, she developed primary glaucoma in her left eye. And the way that I found out that she had glaucoma in her left eye was one day my parents had woken me up early in the morning to let me know that Mackenzie was acting a little strange. So I went to check on her, and when she heard my voice, she wanted to walk towards me, but she ended up walking straight into the TV stand, and that's how I knew that she was definitely completely blind. And when I took a closer look at her, I saw that her left eye was no longer crystal clear. It was very cloudy. So I had to take her to the vet immediately, and that's where she was diagnosed with primary glaucoma in her left eye. Because Mackenzie had glaucoma at such a young age, she actually adjusted to her eye removal surgery really well. She was essentially blind since she was around 14 weeks old. So this is pretty much all she ever knew. She had to learn how to get around completely blind with eyes. So after having them removed, it was just the same routine, just without the pain. In fact, she was actually much more energetic and much more carefree as soon as she recovered from the surgery. I remember when I met Mackenzie for the first time, she was a huge bundle of joy. She was so happy to see us, and just it almost seemed like she knew that we were her family. We were debating between her and one of her sisters, but the sister was completely terrified of us. So it almost seemed like it was the perfect match for Mackenzie to be joining our family. And although she had this big, giant, swollen right eye, that didn't turn me away from wanting to take her home. I was just completely in love with her, and I really wanted her to join our family. And it was really sad for me to learn of her diagnosis But since she was too young for surgery, I had some time to process it and tell myself that things would be okay. There were days where her eye pressure was fantastic, which gave me lots of hope that she could keep her eyes, but the number of bad days highly outweighed the good as the months went by, and once the medication stopped working, I started to get worried. When the eye specialist advised that the next step is to remove the eyes, I remember being the one to convince my family that it was necessary for Mackenzie and that it would be selfish for us to not do the surgery just because she had beautiful blue eyes. I was trying to be strong, but the moment I handed Mackenzie over to her appointment, I started sobbing because deep down I was sad and devastated that she would be losing her eyes forever. My vets always reminded me that dogs would much rather lose their sight than their sense of smell or hearing. Even though Mackenzie had already demonstrated that to me over the months that she did have glaucoma, it was still just so hard to grasp that concept. But after seeing her thriving and being happy after the surgery, I can definitely say that those words are completely true. As a puppy, Mackenzie has always been quite adventurous, so she has always been really good at exploring and mapping out new areas. So she was able to map out our house really easily when she started gaining access to other areas in the house. And she'll definitely bump into a few things here and there as she's exploring and mapping out new areas. For example, she might boop her nose on like a chair or a coffee table as she's mapping out the new areas. And one thing that I did learn about a dog's whiskers is that they can detect airflow, so she's able to actually tell if there's a big object coming up in her way. So I remember when she still had eyes, I thought she could see at least a little bit because she would always dodge the cars on the side of the curb. And so that was me thinking that she could see that there was a car, but it was actually her whiskers letting her know that there was a large object coming her way, and she would just walk out of the way of that object. One of the biggest things that always takes people by surprise about Mackenzie is her ability to play fetch. And the way that she's able to play fetch is purely by hearing and smelling, of course, because that's the only thing she can do is to hear and smell. And what I basically do to help her play fetch is to make sure that I don't throw the ball too far, and I need to make sure that it bounces so that she can hear it bounce. And then after that, she will just chase the ball as it rolls, if it's gonna roll, and if it's already landed and stopped moving, she will kind of go by smell at that point, as there's probably some sort of saliva scent on it, and that's basically what she will follow as she's playing fetch. At first, I actually took Mackenzie to off-leash dog parks, and the first thing I noticed was that it was almost as if there was an invisible radius around me that Mackenzie would never cross. So she would always stay nearby and always come back to check on me without me even asking her to. And then I would also notice that her recall was naturally really good whenever I called her back. So I started experimenting on trails, and she was always really well behaved, always came back when I called her, and she would always wait for me to catch up if she had gone too far. So naturally she was just really good. It just took a little bit of training for her to solidify a couple of things, like making sure she stays away from cyclists on the roads or other people who are also walking on the trails. So Mackenzie by nature is not very cuddly at all. She definitely wants to be by your side at all times, but she doesn't like to cuddle. And I remember last year when her brother Zorro passed away, I was really sad. And I was crying a lot, and the day after she that Zorro passed away, Mackenzie actually came and sat on my lap and cuddled for a little bit. So I think that was probably one of the sweetest things that she's ever done. So that concludes today's Q&A video. Thank you so much for all of the questions that I received on Instagram. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment, or you can also DM me on Instagram, and eventually I'll come out with another Q&A video sometime in the future. Thank you.